there is an acceptable number of flings per summer. I don't know how you have this many flings, but if you do, I guess good on you. For 42% of the people surveyed, they said 2 to 3 summer flings was acceptable. Who comes up with this? Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the I Just Want This Done Divorce podcast. With me, as always, is the amazing Rahul Iyer. How are you, Rahul?
Hey, doing well, Rafe. Glad to be back.
I'm glad you're here. And I'm Rayford Palmer, Rahul Iyer with me, as always, coming at you with interesting divorce stories, legal issues, all that. And we talk here about divorce, dating, marriage, dating trends, all that stuff. And today we've got a fully loaded episode for you. So let's go right into it. You're going to talk about this Ashley Biden story, right?
Yes. So Ashley Biden, daughter of former President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, filed for divorce from her husband of 13 years, Dr. Howard Krein, who is a plastic surgeon. They were married approximately June of 2012. She's 44, he's 58. They filed for divorce in Philadelphia in the quote-unquote Court of Common Pleas. Every jurisdiction has its own name for court, so that's what the Philadelphia court is called. And so she posted on Instagram, walking through the park, giving a thumbs up according to this article. They met in 2010 and got engaged in 2011 and got married in 2012. It's very new, and we'll keep abreast of what happens, how it shakes out, and whether it's going to get any political spotlight because of the names, or if it's going to be very, celebrity-like, where they say, we're going to keep this private and get it done between ourselves.
Got it. So there's really no scoop on what's going on. It's just a court filing at this point, right?
Exactly. So not very much information out there. It's been about a couple of days here. And so we'll see how it sounds.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. I appreciate it. And then next, we've got some legal marriage stories here. And this is some stuff that comes up in the news. And we're now really on top of timing with getting our shows out. So this stuff is very fresh information. You might have heard about this in the news recently. The U.S. Supreme Court was asked to overturn Obergefell, which is a landmark same-sex marriage ruling from many years back. And this essentially, what is happening here is a person is asking for a writ of certiorari. So I know it's a mouthful. There are only a couple ways to get a case heard by the Supreme Court. And one of them is you basically ask the court to hear the issue. And that's when you're asking for writ of certiorari. It's not mandatory that the Supreme Court has to hear your case. So you're applying, saying there is an important constitutional issue that the court should decide. So this doesn't mean Obergefell is going to be overruled. I think people are freaking out about this probably way too much for a couple of reasons. One, most writs get shot down and very few make it through. But secondly, the federal government has a statute legalizing same-sex marriage that came out several years after the Obergefell decision, I believe in 2022. So there's a lot going on here, but there's no reason for panic with this right now. There was a Kentucky county clerk jailed for 6 days in 2015 after refusing to issue marriage licenses to a gay couple on religious grounds. And she's appealing a jury verdict related to that. And so Davis is the one seeking the writ of certiorari, and she's seeking First Amendment protection for free exercise of religion. So she claims that the decision in Obergefell, which extended marriage rights for same-sex couples under 14th Amendment, was wrong. So that's the challenge, and that's what it's arising out of, is this judgment entered against this clerk. So interesting, we'll keep an eye on this case, but ultimately, my personal opinion, the rights of same-sex couples to get married are not threatened by this particular petition, in my opinion. I don't claim to be a civil rights lawyer, but that's my 2 cents from what I know.
And it's codified in federal law, right? The right to marry?
Yeah, that's from, I believe, 2022. So a lot of these stories don't mention that stuff. This is a story from ABC News. This story dates to August 11th, and they don't mention that. There are some states that have introduced legislation to block new marriage licenses for LGBTQ people or passed resolutions urging Supreme Court to reverse Obergefell. And I think the angle is the thought process is the same as what was used for Roe versus Wade, that if that logic applies, then there shouldn't be a federal law. This is not me talking. This is the legal argument, is that this is a state's issue that should be dealt with state legislatures or handled by state legislatures. The difference is there was no federal law passed by Congress. But there apparently is one from 2022 passed by our Congress. So that's the difference here. What's Interesting and maybe disconcerting, I guess, is Gallup poll said in 2015, 60% of Americans supported same-sex marriage. In 2015, 70%, 2025. They say that level's plateaued since 2020. We don't deal with the political issues here. We're just trying to mention the legal issues. And I think first of all, there's a long way to go between same-sex marriage rights being threatened across the country and this happening. In any event, I want to make you aware of that story. And then similarly, we have a different administration in place here in the United States. And as a result, there is some new changes for folks with green cards. And this is a story regarding getting green cards and related to marriage. And essentially the scoop is that as of August 1st, the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service has updated the policy manual, which requires enhanced interviewing and more evidentiary review for people seeking marriage-based green card applications. You could kind of have fairly minimal proof. They'd have you come in and basically talk to them and I guess convince them you're married. And that was enough. Now, apparently, they're asking for bona fide proof of marriage. So they can ask for joint financial records, shared housing documentation, evidence of commingled lives, and so on, and can conduct more targeted in-person interviews when initial evidence raises concerns. So more scrutiny for people asking for green cards based on marriage than we have seen in the past. At least this is in the policy manual, which means there's a policy shift going on at the USCIS. So we're not immigration lawyers, but this is something to know about related to marriage and divorce. We have seen people get divorced who have green cards, and people are worried about the status of their green card because they're now divorced from the citizen. And in our experience, those people don't get deported, but we're not immigration lawyers. Consult with an immigration lawyer for much more on that. But generally, there's like a hardship exception. If you get divorced and you're stuck in the United States, my understanding, you don't get immediately deported. Immigration lawyers, though, may know differently. Rahul, do you know anything about that?
I know a little bit about this. Obviously, I'm also, as you just said, we're not immigration lawyers. But what I do know, again, talking to clients and other immigration lawyers, is that they're not changing the law on what happens here. It's more about, like you said, it's a policy shift. So the law has always required bona fide marriage, or whatever the legal phrase is in immigration law. The law has always required there to be scrutiny, commingling, showing that there is actually a legitimate marriage, and they're not just doing this for a green card. It's not a fraudulent marriage for purposes of letting someone obtain a green card, which historically, many people try and do. They might pay someone a certain sum of money to try and say, I'll pay you, $50,000 if you marry me and to get me a green card and then my citizenship. So that might be worth something to someone. In situations like that, they're usually good at catching it, but also sometimes it slips through the cracks. So what they're essentially doing is we're going to give more scrutiny so that the legitimate couples can still get through, but the illegitimate ones that are maybe doing this for show or fraud are getting caught up in the filter. So I think it's important to note they're not, changing the law, at least at this point. It's more about just enforcing the law that already exists versus, previously maybe it was a more casual experience versus a more scrutinized experience. So I think that's really kind of key here. You've always had to give bank records. You've always had to show pictures. You've always had to show like a lease or some documents showing that you guys are living together, you have a bona fide marriage, etc. So I think all that still applies. And again, no cause for alarm at this point. And we're sort of, since it's marriage related, we thought it'd be interesting to cover this on the pod.
In celebration of this, we will play our new sound effect.
Yes. We've been lining that one up for you.
The great band Queen. Okay,
Yes.
fair use, by the way, folks. So Institute of Family Studies has done some research on marriage and divorce rates. And one thing we've talked about on previous shows is we like divorce stats. We talk about marriage and divorce stats. And we've discussed before, I think many times, how there's been a trend in the United States of the marriages happening later in life and the marriage rate is declining. We've also talked about the divorce rate declining. And there are some stats out there, some information that, we always used to say, 50% of marriages end in divorce in the United States. That is no longer accurate. The stat we're seeing a lot now is 40% chance of divorcing. And Rahul and I have theorized before or wondered whether that was a pure stat, meaning, you can play all kinds of games with statistics. So when this stat of 40% came out, people were saying, oh, yay, people are staying married more. They're staying together. We have wondered on this show, Is that just that fewer people are getting married? So this is a raw number, meaning fewer Americans get divorced? Or is it fewer married people get divorced, meaning people are staying married more, right? Well, this article ties that together, and it says, this is by Leah Sargent. This is Institute for Family Studies. All the links for these are in the show notes. Why the divorce decline might be bad news. And she walks through this and says there is a decline in divorce. And interestingly enough, there's another stat that says 88% of Americans falsely believe the divorce rate is increasing. That's not true. That the overall picture is bleak is what they say. So because marriage rates have dropped sharply in tandem with the decline in divorce, which is what Rahul and I have guessed at. There's a recent Atlantic article cited here, and census data shows the share of prime age adults, 25 to 55. I'm about to be not a prime age adult. That makes me like not prime or out of my prime. I can't call myself Coach Prime. Who are married has fallen from 83%. So in 1960, 83% of people 25 to 55 were married. In 2010, it was 57%. It dropped a ton just to 2010. Morgan Stanley projected that by 2030, 45% of prime age women, 25 to 55, would be single. The projected rise in singleness, this article says, is not the fulfillment of a decreasing desire to be married. And they cite some stats that 3/4 of high school senior girls and about 70% of high school senior boys said in 2020 they expect to get married one day. But they're saying the stats don't bear that out. They also say the decline in marriage is not just a shift to cohabitation or living together. More adults are spending their prime years alone. Pew Research Center calculated in 2019, almost 40% of adults in those prime years were unpartnered compared to 29% in 1990. Cohabitating has risen only modestly as marriage has declined more sharply. The end result is more people spend their lives alone. So they're also tying this to the drop in fertility rate, which you've probably heard about in the news. And Elon famously tweets about this all the time. I think he's single-handedly trying to reverse the trend in the United States. But they wonder why the fertility rate is so low. And they point out that the chances of being married have dropped dramatically. A really interesting story. Rahul, what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think pre-show when you and I were talking about this, big question is, well, I mean, sure, we see headlines that are, shock and awe headlines, why divorce decline might be bad news. And you're like, oh, wait, more people should be getting divorced? What does that mean, right? That's kind of your initial thought. But actually, like you described, there might be some sort of an underlying cause. And this is more of a symptom of a deeper problem, which is low marriage rates, which could then sort of talk about, is society eroding? Are certain sort of concepts that used to be held to be true and people getting married, is that sort of now not happening as much as it used to be? So there's more of a bigger systemic problem that this sensationalized headline really refers to. So
right, exactly. And one thing the author points out of this article is they said once they'd like to see how many people of marriageable age can point to examples of good marriages in their lives. And the theory is if there are just fewer marriages, then there are fewer examples of married people for children to model. So if you have fewer people getting married, then it just aren't as many positive influences on people to get married. And of course, there are people pointing out the breakdown in schools and church and things like that too. It's an interesting trend. And you also wonder the effect of social media, which we talk about all the time. Do we have unrealistic expectations of our spouses? Have people just give up and say, well, it's easier to live alone. I don't want to deal with the hassles of living with another person. Maybe that's all true. I don't know. So interesting story. We wanted to talk about those stats because we've had those threads before, but never seen them tied together. And this story says, yeah, it's because or largely caused by the decrease in marriages. So the next thing is, okay, this one I was eager to hear about. Talk about this next story. This is Russian oligarch story.
Yes, so this is a news out of Connecticut. The U.S., so a short summary is essentially a judge in Connecticut just approved the divorce of Vladimir Guzinski and his wife Elena Konstantinou after a 3-year legal battle, as it says. Vladimir Guzinski, he used to be, or I guess was, once a very powerful Russian oligarch and was essentially exiled by Vladimir Putin after they took over a TV channel called NTV that Guzinski had founded. So that's really what happened. And in 2022, of course, as classic, we always talk about this, they they filed for divorce citing quote unquote irreconcilable differences. As we now know, that just means that's just the ground for divorce. And Connecticut may really just be another no fault state. So that's the only ground for divorce there. The reason this is also interesting is because this oligarch, which obviously equals extremely wealthy person in Russia, is claimed to be, for lack of a better word, broke and spent all his money on financial dealings, business dealings, etc. And he had only really two big assets, which were a $7 million, 14,000 square foot mansion in Greenwich, New York, and another house a few miles or so down the street from that house. So he now lives full time in Israel, but on June 23rd, the judge issued a ruling essentially highlighting some of the history of him being, according to this article, exiled, gave a little history about how that happened in Russia, how powerful he was, how much money he had during his prime, and then the falling out with the Russian government, how certain people ended up dead, as part of sort of just the crackdown, and really how he was going into dire financial state, etc. He was scrutinized by the FBI. He, I guess, famously has the longest ongoing foreclosure in Connecticut history for one of these houses.
Great.
And right, so there's all this happening, and so he claimed all his millions are gone, that he had used all this money to pay debts, and there was nothing more left. So the judge found that he had abandoned his wife, and then the judge said his financial declarations were not credible because he was paying his lawyers for years as part of the fight. But the judge ordered a very nominal alimony payment of $1. Probably just more symbolic than anything. But she got the $7 million Greenwich mansion along with artwork, jewelry, things like that, which I'm sure is very valuable. And he got ongoing foreclosed house that subject to this foreclosure. He even cited a passage from the famed 20th century Russian novel, The Master and the Margarita, where the judge said, like the author's Margarita, this lady, Constantina, would indeed pawn her soul to the devil to find out whether he is alive or dead. So I thought it was pretty cool and a powerful statement. The author, obviously, Mikhail Bulgakov.
Yeah, well, then the other thing, too, that's important here is just because you're in another country doesn't mean the person in the U.S. can't get divorced.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a good example of this. His wife was able to get divorced here and get some rulings on property that's located in the U.S. Now, if he's got property out in the world out there and she doesn't know about it, she's out of luck on that score. But she was able to get awarded some property and get declared divorced, even though this guy's been in exile in Israel for years. So this can be done, and courts will order a divorce even if somebody is out of the country. They'll probably want you to prove service. You'll have to prove that they had notice. If they fail to participate in some other way, you can win and get a divorce judgment and get property awarded to you too. So interesting story about that. And it's interesting how early this guy was sidelined. This oligarch was pushed out around in the early 2000s. He did something wrong, got too powerful or whatever, and Putin didn't like it and shoved him out.
Right. And took over his business, saying this now belongs to Russia. So
the bad old days were back a lot sooner than I think people realized over in Russia. Okay, next is our topic. We always like to talk about a legal topic of interest to our listeners in every show after we talk about celebrities and other divorce news and things like that. And this one is, I want to talk about annulments because people get this confused all the time, right, Rahul? I mean,
Yes.
This is a very misunderstood topic. In Illinois, we call it declaration of invalidity of marriage. So a divorce means your marriage is legit and you are dissolving it. You're breaking the marriage and you're undoing it.
Not undoing it.
You're ending it.
You're ending it, yes.
You're terminating the marriage. The difference with an annulment, and that's not the legal term in Illinois, it's declaration of invalidity. We are saying the marriage never existed, so that it was basically void. And there are very narrow reasons in Illinois, and I'm sure it's similar in other states, why you can declare a marriage invalid. And the reasons are pretty straightforward. Fraud. So somebody lied to you about the basic facts of the marriage, like they misrepresented who they were, or, that would have to be a pretty big set of lies. But the marriage was procured fraudulently. Incapacity, like if somebody was underage, they lacked the capacity to be married. So that's a possibility. Bigamy, you're already married to somebody else, so you can't marry another person. As an aside, Rahul, tell us what happens if you marry somebody when you're already married There's the interesting issue of, is your marriage void or voidable? And what happens if you divorce the first person?
So the key in quote unquote annulment in this invalidity is there's two types, like you said. There's a void marriage and then there's a voidable marriage. The simplified way to describe this is that void marriages are always invalid, meaning they've never been valid and they never existed. Voidable marriages are basically valid until a court declares them to be invalid. So they're voidable. So typically, void is if someone's already married, it's called bigamy, right? And they're already legally married to someone else. So they could not have legally gotten married. So it's void.
Well, what's interesting, though, is you're right. So let's say the person's married the first time and they go marry person two. Person two could go in and declare the second marriage invalid, saying, I didn't know they were married to somebody else. This marriage is void. And that would be that. It wouldn't be a divorce. It would be declared invalid. The interesting twist is if marriage one is divorced, marriage two becomes legal. So it's sort of a weird twist. And you might say out there, has this ever happened? The answer is yes. It's very rare. I've had one case where the second marriage happened and the first marriage was resolved by divorce. And so we were telling the other person who found out about all this, now it's legal. So the interesting twist is if your marriage is void, it never happened. So there's no marital property. There's no alimony or maintenance. All the protections from that you get in the divorce law don't exist. You still would theoretically get child support, and you have to deal with custody and visitation because the kid's interest will be, if you had children, because those interests will be protected. But it's just like having unmarried children. It's a paternity case. So it's really, really interesting. Obviously, narrow set of circumstances. If you don't consummate the marriage due to impotence, then that is actually a valid reason for a marriage to be declared invalid. But there are strict time limits. You can't come back 10 years later and say, oh, it was impotence, so I want to get divorced. You have 90 days. You have a short window to get that annulment. You can't just live with the problem forever and then rely on it to declare your marriage invalid. So that makes sense.
So the other examples besides that is where it's not void from the start, but is voidable. Well, another example of being void from the start is like incest. Like if you were married to like a very closely related family member, that's void from the start.
It had an interesting factoid in Illinois. You can't marry your first cousin unless, I believe you both have to be age 50 or unable to have children because they don't want the genetic issues. But there's actually a law on that in Illinois. I don't have it in front of me, but that's an example. If you married your first cousin under that age limit, it would be a void marriage. It would be invalid.
Exactly. And then you mentioned what's an example of voidable, which is impotency. You also have, a few others. You have like lack of capacity, which is you lack the mental capacity to consent to marriage either due to a mental illness, intoxication, or just being underage.
And obviously these are really rare circumstances, but we want to talk about them. And one interesting thing where this comes into play is I actually had a potential client call one time and say, hey, is there any kind of like, return period, 30-day period for marriage? The context was that the husband cheated on her during the honeymoon and she wanted to get the marriage thrown out. And I had to tell her, unfortunately, it's not like a car or buying something on Amazon. There's no return deal. That once you're married, you're married. I mean, assuming it was otherwise valid, there's no reconsideration period. So take these things seriously, folks, because you may just go to a judge and get it done in 20 minutes, but you're going to have to get divorced. The hour after that, if you want to get divorced, you're going to have to do it. So.
Right. And then you have just a couple other ones is you have duress. Someone was forced into the marriage. And then you have fraud, which was basically induced through fraud or misrepresentation. I see this quite a bit, every once in a while. Again, kind of looping this back to a previous topic, immigration. He married me or she married me just for immigration. The minute he or she got her green card or his green card, they left me. They disappeared. Very tough to prove that. There's got to be clear record. It's not an easy sort of endeavor to have convinced a court that it was an annulment. So yeah, interesting. If the court does void the marriage, declares it invalid, then like you said, very minimal property division and people just kind of go their separate ways.
Well, theoretically, it could be a giant mess. If they've been married a very long time, or they think they've been married a very long time and mixed all their money and acted like they were married, it could be a major legal mess to try to go back to square one and untangle everything. So, yeah, but just extremely rare, but we wanted to talk about it because we get questions from time to time. So it's pretty interesting. So next, so this is funny. The dating app Hilly, H-I-L-Y, by the way, if you want to get in the news, just do a survey, because then whatever you do, you'll be all over the media.
Because of how good the survey may be.
Right. So apparently this is a survey by the dating app Hilly, H-I-L-Y, credit to them. They surveyed 8,000 Gen Z and millennial Americans. They asked about their dating habits, and they asked about summer flings. Here's the scoop. This is scientific, folks. 30% of young American women and 48% of men have increased sexual desire during the summer. All right, well, there you go. 42% of young American women, 52% have had a summer fling. Let's see if they define a fling. They say it's light, exciting, and meant to be lived in the moment. A majority of young American women reported feeling heartbroken, 56% after breaking up with a summer casual partner. 42% of young American women, 48% of men say summer dating turned into a long-term relationship. They said that the stats were pretty similar between Gen Z and millennials, with the 54% saying of Gen Z and 47% of millennials saying they've not had a summer fling. Roughly 37% Gen Z saying they have, 46% of millennials. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a significant enough difference. But then a percentage was not sure if they've had a summer fling. I don't know. I'm not sure how you're not sure about it, but okay.
Maybe. Maybe I did. I can't remember.
And women and men's stats, I mean, like they said, men were slightly more likely to report that they've had a summer fling. You know, I don't know if these are statistically significant, but with 8,000 people, that's a decent sample. They say, what does a summer fling really mean? It could be a series of spontaneous dates. Sometimes those turn into friendship. 1 in 3 young Americans think summer flings are more acceptable than flings during other seasons. Nobody talks about the winter fling.
A casual autumn fling.
The fall fling.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound as good. It's a summer fling, or maybe spring fling.
Yeah, it's nice, like rhyming.
Is summer the perfect time to enjoy the fling without the responsibilities of a committed relationship? Is summer a better time for this? A third of young Americans said yes. The takeaway is summer flings are more acceptable than flings during other seasons. So do with it as you will, ladies and gentlemen. This is entitled Need for Passion. And the header is, I'd like to have a summer fling this year. This isn't me talking. This is the article. 37% of young American women and 75% of men would like to have a summer fling this year. This is, I guess, on their goals, hashtag right. Goals list. So we have double the number of men, and then women want that. So just be advised, guys, you may be out of luck here. And by the way, summer is waning. We're running out of time. So you got to get moving on this. Go to one of those dating things like we talked about last show with Rahul, where you have your friend talk about how great you are with some slides. And then a chunk, about 30 to 40% of Gen Z and millennials have specifically looked for those on dating apps. Anyway, I thought some of these stats were funny. A couple of these are not appropriate for a family show I will not talk about. 48% of young American women and 69% of men would like to have sex with their summer fling in public. All right, folks, don't do that. You're going to get in trouble. Oh, and here's a stat that I don't know where they came up with this. There is an acceptable number of flings per summer. I don't know how you have this many flings, but if you do, I guess good on you. For 42% of the people surveyed, they said 2 to 3 summer flings was acceptable. Who comes up with this?
Yeah.
And somebody, but beautifully, over 10 summer flings was found acceptable by 10% of men. Those guys are clearly read the game, the book by Strauss, the game. Those are the players out there. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Oh, and if traveling this summer, 27% of young American women and 21% of men prefer locals for summer flings. So as they say out surfing, locals only. So there you go. All right, that's enough of that. I'm boring everybody. Let's move on. Another dating thing I wanted to talk about was Tawkify, whatever the heck that is. No hate intended. It's a matchmaking app. They've revealed dating trends they've surveyed. So here are the dating trends they've identified. Story by Noelle Barnes, just published. Dates get a serious upgrade. Tired of the same old dinner and movie? You're not alone. I'm quoting the story. Their data shows activity-based dates are taking over. Now, my dad told me in 1984 to take a girl to the movies, like do something, have some activity. So you're not just awkwardly sitting there. Good advice from Douglas Palmer and good advice today. Dating got a serious upgrade because we're supposed to do mini golf or bowling, museum walks. Very good if you try to show the girl that you're like an intellectual. Just don't let on that you don't know what the hell any of the paintings are. The trick is go up and read the caption when she's not looking. And then you step back and you go, oh, look, it's a Monet.
Yeah,
And then
right.
and she's like, oh, this guy's so wise,
Yeah.
Also learn a few paintings ahead of time on Google that are in the museum. In our case, we have the lovely Art Institute, famous for Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, among many others. I am not really an expert, but I do know Nighthawks. So you find a few that you know are there, and you say, oh, of course, there's Nighthawks over here. All it's got to be is 2 or 3, and then she thinks you're brilliant.
It's the rule of 3. Make sure your eyesight's good if you're planning on reading it right when you get there. Otherwise, you'll be squinting at something and
Don't be looking at your phone. You got to do the research ahead of time.
yeah, don't use Google Lens.
No, don't. That's not cool. Either that or when she's in the washroom or something, then that's the time for the Google Lens, but make it fast. Okay. See, Rahul's here for the young angle with the high tech. I wouldn't think to look at my phone on that for Google Lens. Food tastings or cooking classes, that's fun. Casual hikes or beach yoga. Watch the beach yoga, folks. If you're not competent in the yoga sphere and you're a dude, you will make an ass out of yourself. And
Yes.
it will not be impressive. It won't be a good look. So be careful about the athletic things. If you or she aren't athletic, that won't be a good vibe. Dates make conversation easier. Just like my dad told me in 1984, keep things casual, let your personality shine. Virtual dates have declined, Rahul, from 37% to 29%. People want to meet IRL. Distance is no longer a deal breaker, but remember, folks, those long distance things are rough. So they do say couples are happy to commute to find the right match. This is like 64% would be willing to date long distance to find a true connection. Okay. But in 2024, it was 35%. So apparently there are more people willing to travel, I guess. Yeah. So let's see. What's driving second dates? Everybody wants to know. Mike Banovac, millionaire date doctor, said, what about first dates, Rahul? This is interesting. He said, the purpose of a first date is to see if there's going to be a second date. Mm-hmm. Don't make it more than that. Don't expect true romance and things to go crazy. It's an initial interview type of thing.
Yes. And you had tips on how you should present yourself, what you should talk about to determine if there should be the second date.
And not to kind of get off of that purpose and kind of like ending it when it's time to end it. A lot of good things like that were in his interview. So you talk about the traits most likely to lead to a second date are athletic or active lifestyle, of course, intellectual curiosity, sense of humor. Those 3 were all rated at the same level, about 20%. So all of them are a big deal. A rise in interest in fitness-minded lifestyles. So when she comes in there, if you're there first with a dumbbell, like in the Anchorman, you're like 998. You're like curling 999, 1,000. That will impress her.
Yeah.
So you say you've been yogging.
Yeah. Or at least she'll think you're funny.
Or you'll be funny, right? You can't lose. You're hitting 2 of those points in one. Divorce daters are clear on what matters. Okay. So yes, they are, because they're serious about dating and finding somebody else. So they're looking for, divorcees are looking for personal integrity, emotional availability and maturity, intellectual compatibility. What they show is interesting in the chart, though, is they put integrity at the top and then emotional availability and then intellectual compatibility third. It's pretty interesting. So they also say that dating app use is dropping among clients 40 or older to this matchmaking service. And we've talked about that. The people are very frustrated with these apps, and the older generation is not happy with what they're seeing with these dating apps. There's a dating-based app, or an app in Charlotte, that is a new app for dog lovers. Apparently, it's a dating app for people who like dogs and they want to bond over that. So this app is called Frolly. It's supposed to match people through a shared love of dogs. And everybody knows the old gag about the guy walking through the park with a puppy and to have girls talk to him and, pet the dog and all that stuff. So they took it seriously and they created this app for dog lovers. And you can create a profile for your dog, their size, breed, and lifestyle. And the app uses artificial intelligence matching algorithms to connect people on their dog preferences and lifestyle compatibility. And what they're saying is, like, do you allow the dog in your bed? Are they allowed on your furniture? If you have a cat, is the dog good with the cat and this kind of stuff? And I think they figure if you're a dog person, that's a huge part of your life. So they want to make sure, is this upfront? Like, is this a deal breaker or not? So interesting angle.
Yeah. And there was a nice quote there that said, the qualities that people look for in partners are sometimes the qualities that they exemplify with their dogs, like being adventurous, Himmel said. So that was interesting. And one of the cool things is it says that, Frolly will be free for 6 months with a $12 monthly subscription fee thereafter. And a portion of profits will be donated to local rescue organizations, which I thought was a cool, noble sort of gesture.
Maybe worth a try if you're out there and you love your pup and you want to meet people that have a shared love of animals. That's not a bad angle. It's clever.
there was this article published by the Hindustan Times out of India that basically is titled, "Why Do Men Face More Rejection on Dating Apps?" And there was, again, a study that was done. Study of 3,000 users on a Czech dating app. So this is how the Czechs do it, I guess. Found that men tend to reach out to more desirable women, while women seek matches with similar levels of attractiveness. So it's essentially suggesting that men get greater rejection levels because of their unrealistic expectations, while women are more living within their sort of radius. And so there is suggesting really that the women aren't as picky. It's just they're trying to outkick their coverage, or they're punching above their weight, or whatever the phrase might be.
Whatever phrase you want to use.
Yeah, so they're trying to get to the next level, I guess. So anyway, thought that was pretty interesting. I know we've had other apps say, or other surveys say otherwise, and it's kind of another interesting thing out of, maybe this is how it is in the Czech. So
yeah, and they've talked about the stuff when we've discussed this before. We've said there's theories that women are forced to use photos, whereas normally they would get to know somebody's personality. And if they're forced to just look at pictures, they're going to select based on looks, and they're going to select a small percentage. And we've come across stats that said like women select 10% of the men on the dating apps, and men select like 50%. And the implication is that women are far more choosy. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's just guys that are overreaching all the time.
yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I said this before. One way to cut through static is go meet people in real life. Join a running club, go to the gym, go to the bar or library or church, and meet the people that have shared interests with you, and you've got stuff to talk about right away. So that's it for the show. Thank you very much for listening. So first, Rahul, how can people find you on social media?
People can find me at Chicago Divorce on Instagram or on LinkedIn with my name.
Also, I'm available at Rayford Palmer on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Have a great day.